Welcome, Rodney.
Good to be here,
This is
Whaleoil.
my third Member of Parliament interview, and doing interviews with the MPs that I'm a fan of.
Well, you're doing an interview of your actual MP.
Well, not actually. I don't live in your electorate.
Well, really? Am I talking to you and you don't live here?
That's right.
Oh. Still, I consider you an ACT voter.
That's right. Well, philosophically, I'm kind of ACT. I actually did vote for ACT once, so it was...
Well, let me win you back this interview.
Sure.
Because, you know, the thing about politics to me is that it actually is a contest of ideas and competing policies and direction for the country.
Yes.
And that's what's so disappointing about heading into this election, that I think, you know, so much needs to be changed, so much can be better. Labor have led us down a bad path, and no one except ACT is putting up an alternative vision or set of policies.
Yes.
Now, I think it's good for the National Party. They're succeeding, they're doing fabulously well by not announcing any policies, because people are sick of Helen Clark, they're sick of Michael Callan. There's going to be a change of government, there's no doubt about that.
Yes.
But they should also use the opportunity to be good for the country and actually say, here are the 10 things or here are the 5 things that we need to do to put this country on track as we see it.
Well, ACT's actually thought about that, haven't they? And you've got
Well, we're
not
lucky.
10 things or 5 things, you've got 20.
Yeah, we've got 20, we've got a whole pledge card. We couldn't, this is the pledge card, and this is very different to Helen Clark's pledge card.
Did you pay for that yourself then?
That's one difference. We didn't make Whaleoil or any other taxpayer pay for it. It's actually all paid for by members' subscriptions. And what happened was, I've worked very hard to secure the seat of Epsom. I work, you know, I don't take anything for granted. I'm going to have to work right up to election day in Epsom. And but I think it's accepted that I'll keep the seat, which is a wonderful thing. I've really enjoyed being the MP for Epsom. It sort of grounds you politically, and it forces you to get out into the community and mix with everyone.
Well, the thing with Epsom voters too is they're actually politically savvy.
They're very savvy.
Right down to the newest voter in Epsom.
Yeah.
And so you get lots of opinions, no matter
Yes.
which party you're in.
Yes.
And a lot of activity is based around Epsom. I've always viewed it as a hub electorate. When it was Eden electorate before and now Epsom. It's always been a hub of Auckland. A lot of activity is run from Epsom.
Well, certainly it's been a great privilege to win the seat and to represent Epsom, because you're right, they are politically aware, they do have an opinion, and they do follow what you're up to, and they let you know when they think you're wrong. Also too, I've worked out that you have to represent as constituent MP everyone. So while I've got my political views, you know, anyone can come to my door, I'll listen to anyone, and I've learnt to be a sort of friendlier guy in the electorate than rather just pushing my policies. But what that meant was, when I got to the end of last year, I thought, okay, we've got to that position. I think New Zealand's so far off the pace, economically, socially, politically, that we're just, you know, dropping off the end of the world.
Well, we were supposed to in '99 have an aspiration from the Prime Minister to climb up the OECD rankings.
That's right.
And despite almost 9 years of really golden weather that we could have taken advantage of, we've squandered that and slipped down the OECD rankings in every aspect except for the worst ones, like child abuse and crime and those sorts of things.
And if you look at it, there's no surprise in that, because if you take the policies that we have in place now and the policies that have been introduced, every one of them is wealth sapping, and every one of them is about redistributing the wealth, rather than taking a step back and saying, look, you know, we need to bake a bigger cake. And so we lost 78,000 people last year overseas, 40,000 to Australia. These are people that are not coming back. And the thing that astonishes me about that, I'm just a young boy. I'm 51. And when I was growing up and going to university, we all had an aspiration to travel. We all wanted to see the world, because New Zealand in the 70s was pretty narrow, and you wanted to get out and see the world, and we did.
But you always wanted to come home.
Always wanted to come home. You'd meet a Kiwi. I remember travelling with an English lady, and she said, "It's amazing, you Kiwis." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Whenever you meet a Kiwi, you establish that they know someone that you know," which is pretty bizarre if you're a Pom. And second of all, you always say, "When are you going back?" You never ask if. Because every Kiwi you'd meet was always coming home to New Zealand. Why? Because this was the best place. This is where the most opportunity for us was.
And so what's happened?
30 years on of gutless politics and politicians, with one or two notable exceptions, Roger Douglas, Ruth Richardson. We have just pandered to the sort of lowest common denominator of politics. We've done a politics that said, the way to win votes is to hand out the pork, tax people hard, pretend that wealth grows on trees, and not take any hard decisions. And so you look ahead and you think, wow, that movement of people, that's 2 electorates
Yes.
a year.
Pity we haven't got 2 less MPs then.
Well, part of our plan is to go to 100 MPs.
Well, there's a saving of several $100 million probably.
Well, a saving potentially huge, because if you make, everyone knows that as you make a committee bigger and bigger, it becomes more and more dysfunctional and ineffective. And Parliament could do very well with 100 MPs, and Cabinet could do very well with 12. And you'd start to get some decisions, particularly if you get your goal and your principles right, which is again something that's lacking. But anyway, back to the story. So I went to see Roger Douglas because no one is more steeped in understanding politics than Douglas and his background.
Well, looking at problems and finding innovative and creative solutions for solving those problems.
And packaging them.
Yes.
The thing that surprises me about Roger is, I've done a lot of economics, and so I know about economic policy. But what Roger brings to it is another dimension, which is politically packaging policy. So it has the hard bits and the good bits sort of combined, and so you move the country forward, which isn't something that's appreciated in economics. We tend to look at what's the right thing to do and not think about the packaging. So I went to see Roger and I said, we're in a parlous state actually. There's going to be a change of government. It was clear last Christmas. And the National Party, their view is, and it's understandable, they've got to win the middle vote and beyond in order to govern. And there's us sitting there with a seat, which means every party vote for Act will count, but we need to make it count for something for the sake of the country. I said, what would you do? And he said, the first thing that you need to do is establish a goal. And not being a socialist, I thought, goal for the country, what does that actually mean? And I said, like what? And he said, like, let's beat Australia by 2020. Yeah. And I thought, doesn't that capture everything about the attitude that we have in New Zealand? Because do you fundamentally believe that economically, socially and politically we can beat Australia by 2020?
Yep.
There's plenty of people that will make an excuse why we can't. Oh, they're bigger than us, there's more people, they've got minerals, yada, 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 yada.
That says more about the person who says the word can't.
That's right. And then there's people that say, yeah. And of course it's so much the Kiwi spirit, the competition with Australia.
Yeah, make politics a sport.
Yeah, and make the things that matter a sport. It's great to have a great All Black team or for Scott Dixon to win the Indy 500, but it'd be much better to be the richest country in the world. And so I love the way Roger put that. And it means more than being in the top half of the OECD, doesn't it? And the beating Australia. And it also means we know when you talk in the street, you talk at the Rotaries, you talk in the clubs, you say, our kids are leaving for Australia, and they all nod their heads, and I said, we want to bring them home.
I think everybody in New Zealand knows somebody in their family that no longer lives in New Zealand. Now, for myself, both my brother and sister no longer live in New Zealand.
My 2 sisters are gone.
Yeah, my sister lives in Sydney and my brother lives in Korea. So... And
it's hard. And there's no... And they're there because, better opportunity, but then they make their life there and the grandkids stay there. And the loss to New Zealand is the loss of that ingenuity, that entrepreneurial spirit, that get up and go. That's what's draining away. So I said, and Roger said, well, you need that goal, and then it's not good enough just to have the goal, you need the plan by which to achieve
the
it.
goal. But you can't make a plan unless you've got a goal.
No. But of course, what we've seen with Helen Clark is goals with no plan, no credible plan.
Well, I mean, the goal was to be in the top half of the OECD. That's like attending secondary school and saying, I want to be a C student.
Yes, but even if you want to be a C student, you then got to say, okay, I need to turn up at least some days, I need to do some study. What Helen Clark said was, I'll set the goal of being a C student and then never go to school. Because then she proceeded to put up taxes, she proceeded to re-regulate heavily the labour market, making it hard to hire and fire. She made it tougher for business with crazy rules. Now we have the emissions trading scheme where we're going to create a market in hot air for no apparent reason other than that it'll give us some moral authority on the world stage.
But have the most expensive products on the world stage.
Sure, well, businesses will just have to shift at the margin because it'll be too expensive to produce here. So they're all things designed to make you poorer, and therefore the goal becomes meaningless. So I said to Roger, okay, well, let's do it, but I need your help. And I need you to stand for ACT. And I've got to say, he thought about it, and his eyes lit up.
So you get that little twinkle.
He got that twinkle, and he's into it. Boy, oh boy, I can't keep up with the guy. I mean, Roger's 70, and he's on fire, and this time he's not mucking around, because he's seized by it. And so we went around economists, business leaders, policy wonks, people with political experience, and said, you know, what would the plan look like? And it wasn't hard to draw up, actually. We liked the idea of 20 things.
Yes.
And we sat down and drew up the 20 things that would make a difference. And fascinating was, amongst all these people, there was agreement about what New Zealand needed to do. And then they said, but the trouble is, no politician's got the guts to do it.
Well,
And
there's
so
two politicians who have the guts to do it, isn't there?
So what we did was, we put our logo and we just said it, the guts to do what's right. Because that summarises ACT. And we got John Ansell on board.
Fabulous guy.
Fabulous. And he's done a fabulous job of, and you can download this from act.org.nz. He did a fabulous job because of taking, you know, you could produce a manifesto, we've got a background document about the policies.
But only political wonks read manifestos.
That's right. And so what John did was, he got this concept of, well, first of all, this is interesting because you say, well, how do we compare to Australia? Well, the crudest way of doing it is just, you know, what's the average wage there compared to here? Well, we're $450 a week behind. And if you look at Tasmania, we're $100 behind. So we'd be the poorest state of Australia.
And South Australia is not much better than Tasmania.
We're poorer than them. So that gave us a tangible measure of the effect of baking a bigger cake versus redistributing it. Because if you think of Helen Clark giving the pensioners $20 a week, students free loans, we tax cut over here, 2 blocks of cheese for you, you little mice, versus policies that build a bigger cake.
Yes.
And so if you caught Australia, you'd be talking $500 a week.
Yes.
You know, there's no way that you could redistribute the cake and give everyone an extra $500. But over time, if you actually build your economy at 5 or 6% rate of growth, 7% rate of growth rather than 1.5%, which is what's forecast, then you start to get serious money. So we said, well, we want $500 a week. In fact, we called it, and this was quite. Ruth Richardson suggested we'd done this wrong because she said, we said New Zealand's biggest pledge card containing the juiciest election bribe ever. And Ruth's comment, and I took it on board, was, look, that's just the opposite of what you guys are about. You're not about bribing people with your own money. You're actually about, you know, so this is wrong. And I went back to John Ansell and I said, look, we've got to change this. Can't we say, you know, the juiciest, you know, carrot ever or something like that? And he said, no, because this is what makes people read it.
Yes.
And I thought about that, and I thought, yeah, the thing about Ruth is she's going to read it anyway, you know, because she's a policy wonk and it's from ACT. But what I loved about this was people read that and they think, oh, this is funny because there's a political party saying they're going to bribe us, which they know political parties
Well, it's being honest, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're going to bribe us, but as you read on, and so what I've noticed is this has captured people and they start to read it. Now here's John Ansell's other great contribution. You put the policies down here, and I mean there are things like, oh, obvious really, cut government waste, cut spending to Australian levels, cut and flatten taxes, reform local government to its core functions, get rid of red tape, sort out the Resource Management Act, open up education with school vouchers, healthcare, get a competitive market, ACC sane, privatise, cut tariffs, free up land for housing, sort out law and order so the thugs get put away, climate change, stop the dopiness, constitutional framework like a taxpayer bill of rights, regulatory responsibility bill, put mentors beside families at risk so you actually deal with the dysfunctionality. None of this is hard, so we put all the policies down here. It's hard politically because politicians are gutless.
Well, it's hard politically because it requires some self-discipline on the behalf of the taxpayers.
Sure. And so then we put down the countries that are doing it. So this is funny. We went on privatisation and we said, you know, sell state businesses where private firms can serve customers better. And we said, well, where else in the world is that happening? And we came back with this answer: practically all countries except Cuba, Burma, and North Korea. And New Zealand under either National or Labour, which is mad, you know, the idea that privatisation is somehow off the agenda when it's been such a stunning success, and why you'd have politicians and bureaucrats running a business beats us. Then we have the benefits along here.
Yes.
And then down here, this is a bit of a best estimate. The contribution that it would make to economic growth, doing that, the percentage contribution, and what that would mean at a point in time in terms of dollars to get to the $500, and whether you agree yes or no. You can go down there and you can say, well, I agree with that, I agree with that. And that's something that politics in New Zealand doesn't present, that if the government is going to buy up the train set and you feel good about that, if we're going to lead the world in having a emissions trading scheme for heavens knows what reason, it's presented as though it's all costless and there's no trade-off. And what we've tried to do is saying, well, if you turn it on its head and adopt good policies, then you'll get better growth. This is what it would mean. This is what it would mean to dollars in the pocket. This is what it would mean compared to us and the rest of the world. And so that's what we've done. And then here's my goal: secure the seat of Parliament, of Epsom for Parliament, and then campaign on this pledge card, as Ruth Richardson said to me, talk about nothing else but this, because this is the plan for New Zealand.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk with you, is almost no mainstream media have covered your 20-point pledge card.
Mm-hmm.
And if they did, I didn't notice. And
No.
I'm very much interested in what's happening with ACT and what's happening with national and indeed all politics. So if I missed it, then so did the general public.
It didn't happen.
So, and I'd downloaded it, I'd linked to it and read it. And I thought, these sound like good ideas. Hard, but nothing worth achieving in life is ever easy.
No, and I think, I mean, the media have made a calculation that sort of ACT will win Epsom and that's it, and so we're not a player. And I don't mind that, because I always like being the underdog. And also working to achieve a good result rather than just, you know, jumping up and down in the media. So my goal is election night, and my goal is to get the 5% plus, hopefully 8%. And if I get the 8%, then I'll be in a position, ACT will be in a position to negotiate these policies
And be
with
truly
national,
effective.
and be truly effective. And in particular, and this is how I explain it to people, you know, if I'm given one line, you know, I was in the gym just now at lunchtime and they said, oh, what are you trying to achieve this election? I just looked at them and I said, make Roger Douglas Minister of Finance. And they said, whew, that's what we need. Now, there's a whole lot in New Zealand that says, bloody hell, not Roger Douglas, and they run out the door, but they're never going to vote ACT, or if they do, they're making a mistake.
Like I said to you before over a lunch once, You only need to get 5% of people on your
Yeah.
side. You know that there's 90 odd that don't subscribe to this.
That's right.
But what I think has been hard for ACT, and indeed some other parties, is and you talk about a debate of ideas, I think largely we've lost that over the last, let's say, 15 years. in New Zealand
MMP
politics.
too has taken it because people think, oh, well, it doesn't really matter what they promise. It's
Up to whatever the so you almost, where National's being criticised for having any policy, that's almost a decent point to be at, because it doesn't matter what their policies are, they're all going to get discounted by negotiations.
Yeah, imagine it makes a big difference if they're reliant on, say, the Maori Party and the Greens, or they're reliant on Winston Peters, or they're reliant on ACT, Rodney Hide and Roger Douglas.
Exactly.
I mean,
there's huge difference in policy.
Huge difference. And so the real feature of the next government, look, Helen Clark's gone, take that as a given.
Except though Helen Clark has achieved one thing in her time there, and that is reframing the discussion of politics into a left versus right. Now, I've never viewed ACT as a right party.
Mm-hmm.
I've never viewed them as a centrist party. How would you define ACT? Because I don't think that ACT fits into those. You've got libertarian ideals, where you're talking about smaller government, bigger individual responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Now that matches very nicely with the core principles of the National Party,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the policies, but National Party has always had at its core a belief in individual freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other side, you've got what I would say conservative financial leanings that then live up side by side with the Liberal side.
Mm.
So it's very hard to fit you in the left and right. And Labour has successfully painted ACT as a hard right party,
Yeah.
when in actual fact you're not. How are you going to combat that perception? Because perception is reality in
Sure.
politics.
I think we're always going to be up against it because it's a cheaper shot. In fact, John Key said that.
It is a cheap shot, but
You know,
that's Helen Clark,
John
isn't
Key.
it?
Well, no, I mean John Key also, and I mean he would be responding to what he knew Helen Clark's criticism would be.
Yes.
When I said that I wanted to make Roger
Well,
Douglas.
he made a political answer,
Sure.
not a well thought out answer.
No, but it's perception. And so
Yes.
John Key, he's hunting the middle ground. He knew that he's vulnerable to ACT, and Helen Clark throwing ACT at him. And so he said, look, Roger Douglas will never be Minister of Finance. He doesn't want hard right policies. And so that is always going to be a cheap shot that we'll get from Labour and National. How do we overcome it? By actually talking about the ideas,
Yes.
by actually talking about the direction. And how would I describe myself? Well, words have got so debased and polluted. I was on radio the other day and a guy was calling me a fascist, and I said, well, that's interesting. I don't think he could have spelt it. But I said, what do you mean? Define fascism for me. And to him it was just a term of abuse.
Mm.
And it came down to the fact that he didn't think that we had policies to help the poor. Well, that may or may not be true, but that doesn't define a fascist. So,
Well, you actually do have policies to help the poor, but it's to help the poor, not to give the poor money.
well, the thing is, what I would describe myself as is, and we have to put the word classical in front of it,
Yes.
but I'd describe myself to people that know about these things as a classical liberal. And what is a classical liberal? Well, a classical liberal is a person that believes that human beings have rights, that every human being has the same rights, and that government's job is to uphold those rights, not pinch them.
And enable the rights.
Well,
Take, for instance, the Electoral Finance Act. That impinges quite significantly on people's rights.
Sure.
And you attended the marches and voted against that.
yeah, it's a fundamental right to have free speech, and we don't need in government to enable free speech, we just need government to allow it.
That's right.
And what the Electoral Finance Act does is suppress free speech, and so therefore it's wrong. And I think that having said that, I think you do need to have those principles, and then you need to look at where New Zealand is, which is a heavily socialised heavily regulated, heavily dependent population on government, where we sort of sit there.
We have a beneficiary mentality.
Well, and our businesses do too. They rush off to government. We're back to that, what it was in the old days. Looking for a handout. And so then you have to say, well, okay, given that you're here, what can you do to get into a better place, given your principles and your vision for New Zealand? And that's where this 20-point plan comes in, because all of this is practical. Take the issue of school vouchers. The left hate school vouchers, and they say, oh, it's a voucherisation of the school system. Well, okay, but then the question is, would it be better? Would it be improvement? The way I've described it is a scholarship.
Because it's all in the wording, isn't it?
Oh yes, but more particularly, it's in how it empowers parents, how it allows for diversity, how it allows for competition and choice, all those things which are good, versus a state-run monopoly in which you're powerless, where they get your money and then you get whatever service they leave you. And so...
There's an interesting concept here, and you may not be aware of this, but if you homeschool a child, the state gives you back $750. Yeah. And I thought, not like most people would think, and thought that, oh, that's great. I thought that's how much they value the education per year, per annum, of my son. And I value the education of my son far more highly than $750 per annum. And so if that's the value of what it is for each person to achieve at that level, well, then you get what you pay for. And if it's $750 per child, then we're getting the equivalent of poorly manufactured goods from Burma.
And that's what you'd expect from a state-run monopoly, where everyone has to be the same, where a bunch of bureaucrats sit around politically deciding how things will be run, and it's a one-size-fits-all. And it might be valued at $750, but the cost of it is, in financial terms, from the taxpayer, is $8,500 a year for a secondary school. But the real cost of it is actually the lost opportunity, where we put so many kids into an education system
that doesn't suit
them, and therefore the real cost is the lost opportunity and potential of those kids. And it doesn't suit kids at the bottom.
No.
It doesn't suit kids at the top. It doesn't suit kids who are very creative and imaginative, because it's all dumbed down to the middle. And it might suit this hypothetical median, average sort of person here. And yet we need to be reaching down and helping those kids that are struggling. We need to be taking those kids that are at the top and letting them run. We need to be taking that creativity and ingenuity. Our school system is designed for the 19th century.
Well, our school system was designed, you're right, for the 19th century, and built around the harvest in the summer. So we have the longest holiday in the summer, because then, as a rural economy as we were in the 19th century, we needed people to bring in the harvest. So they designed a system around that, and it hasn't moved. It's one of the few industries in New Zealand,
the only one,
that has not changed.
Not just in New Zealand, around the world, because of its state dominance. But if Adam Smith were alive today and he went into, say, the Herald, he wouldn't know what the hell that was. He'd be looking at it and thinking, and you'd have to explain to him it's all computerised and whatnot. It's actually a newspaper production thing. If he went into a classroom, he'd know exactly what was going on, because it hasn't changed. Kids sitting at desks, teacher up the front talking. And
that again is only one learning style,
right.
And there's something like 8 or 9 different learning styles.
The other thing about our school system was it was built around the need to regiment for a coming industrial society.
And creating workers
That's right.
for that.
Who would work 8-hour day, 2 o'clock, 12 o'clock, knock off, 1 o'clock, go back. Of course, no one works like that now. Now we're in a much more creative, fluid operating environment, and yet our school system is still regimented as though the worker turns up, docks in, sits there, works away, clocks out, and a school sort of regimented in that way. I've been to a lot of schools. So many exciting schools. There's one just across here in Alpers Ave called Mind Alive, which is almost a crazy school, but the kids love it, and they're learning, and it's creative, and it's fun.
If kids enjoy being somewhere,
Yep.
they will then learn.
Yeah.
But I mean, just to follow on from that, about education and how it basically slots people into pigeonholes. Some of the wealthiest people that I know were considered to be dummies at school.
Sure.
One fellow I know left school at 15, branded troublesome and a dummy, is worth several tens of millions of dollars, and he started his first job digging holes for the post office.
It's great. And I mean, I tell you, one of the saddest things I've come across is parents of gifted children.
Yes.
And their children...
They struggle at school.
They struggle at school. Their
Because
parents,
they're different.
yes. And they're sitting there and they're causing trouble. And they often can do badly in the exams because they're sort of looking at the questions in a way. There was one that, I don't know, question was something like this. What's the odd one out? Violet, violin, yellow, blue. And the sort of 5-year-old wrote blue. Got it wrong. And why did that? Oh, well, all the rest are more than one syllable.
Well, it is a valid answer.
Of course it is, but it was wrong. But that's
No.
how a gifted child looks at the questions. And she said, I'm reading a great
But that's
book.
society,
I'm reading a
isn't
great
it?
book about Albert Einstein. I struggle to understand his brilliance and his thoughts, and it so fascinates me. But I'm just reading this book on his life and his time at Princeton with Gödel. And the thing that has interested me the most about this book is you realise that Einstein's ability was his imagination.
Yes, and that gets suppressed at school.
That's right. And so it wasn't that he was great at maths. In fact, he made an arithmetical error.
Well, he got an F in algebra.
Did he? I didn't know that.
Yes, he did.
And but once they worked out that light was a constant speed, and they did that like in the 1860s when they measured
Which is a phenomenal achievement.
phenomenal achievement, because they measured light travelling longitudinally and latitudinally and decided it was the same, decided they were measuring it sufficiently accurate that it must be the same and a constant. And he started as a late teenager thinking, well, how would the world look if you were riding on a light wave? And out of that was born the insights. And you think, he had no information that other people didn't have. He didn't do complicated experiments or maths. He just imagined.
Conceptual, yes.
He imagined. And when you think of people who create wealth in the modern society, Google or Microsoft, it is actually the imagination, the creativity that is the key.
But that brings us back to your original, at the start of this interview, that politics is about a battle of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And we've somehow got to a point in New Zealand where it is wrong to have an idea that differs from she who must be obeyed.
Yes, and also it's wrong to have an idea that the mass of people think is wrong, which is the extreme intolerance. And the intolerance of modern society is truly amazing, because we think on the one hand that we live in a very tolerant society, but it's bullshit really, because if you get up and you say, look, I think the worry about climate change is exaggerated, you just shot down.
They almost brand you as a Holocaust denier.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I'm not an expert climatologist, but
Neither is Al Gore.
no, but I did. I mean, I studied science. I've got 2 environmental science degrees. I lectured in environmental science, so I know a little bit about these things and how you approach them and how you think about them and how you look at them. But even to question it, even if you're wrong, you should be able to question. That's the mark of a tolerant society.
Yes.
And yet, in so many areas where you question or raise an issue, not just the politicians, but sort of people denounce you as breaking step. And nothing is more ridiculous than in the climate change debate to have people say, oh, well, the massive scientists say this.
Well, they don't.
Well, they don't, but also science isn't about consensus, because every scientific breakthrough was one scientist. You know, the mass of scientists didn't say E equals mc squared. One did.
Mm.
And then it was tested.
And the world thought that the Earth was flat, and one guy sailed around it.
That's right. And so, you know, again, I'm less worried in this discussion about whether what's true and what's not. What worries me...
The truth will out, though.
The truth will out. But what worries me is that you actually can't have a discussion, a diversity of views, a proper debate. No, you're denounced as... People with a different view are seen to be immoral.
Well, I see this all the time because I'm one of the bloggers out there that draws attention to the other side of the argument about climate change. And they've been clever in changing it to climate change.
Well, yes, because no longer we're warmer.
Well, in the 1970s, the world was concerned about global cooling, and now it's global warming. But to cover the bets, the crowd that are into controlling people through climate have discovered climate change. That means they're never wrong.
Never wrong, because the climate will change.
But I've got a couple.
The weather will be different tomorrow.
I've got a couple of stalkers that every time I post a climate thing, come on and question my scientific ability.
Oh, well, let's hope that we get them going with this interview.
Absolutely, but I don't profess to be a climate change expert, but I do profess to have decent reading comprehension. And if there's enough people out there saying, "Hang on a minute," it's worth listening to them, because they may actually be right.
We had a fellow come in to the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee. I haven't sat through the submissions at length just because I'm meeting 2 or 3 days a week, all day. And I'm against the bill. Only 2 votes against it. And so, you know, sitting through the minutiae and endless submissions about how bad it is isn't helpful. Plus it drives me bats. But I was sitting there and we had a fellow come in, a PhD come in, whose field is forecasting. And the principle is of forecasting, and he works with an academic in the States who is the guru who writes a textbook on the principles of forecasting. And this applies to demography.
So that means
economics.
they're also experts in chaotic environments.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but they know about forecasting. And so they looked at the climate change forecasts, and something like there are 144 principles of good forecasting. Seems a lot, but that's what they told us. And they could only determine yes or no on 89 of them. And of the 89, something like 83 were violated. And if 3 or 4 of those principles are violated, then the forecast is rubbish. And of course, the whole thing is predicated on models, which by their nature have to be a simplistic analysis.
And have a constant.
Yes. And I well remember being at school and reading The Limits to Growth, which was the first sort of Malthusian computer model by the Club of Rome. That was published in 1972, and it was we're all going to run out of resources about 1992, I think it was.
Oh.
And
you think they might have been wrong?
I think so. And I remember when I was doing environmental science at Canterbury University, Jeanette Fitzsimon's coming along and giving a lecture about how we're running out of oil. And,
peak oil people.
This was before peak oil. This was just, she was just clubbing a roaming. This was like 1980. That was 82. And so she was just still clubbing a roaming. It was 10 years on from the Club of Rome, but by then, of course, the Club of Rome had been totally discredited. Then we had peak oil, which is nonsense. And then the funny thing is, if we're running out of oil, we shouldn't worry about global warming because there'll be no oil.
Exactly.
And
but aren't we supposed to have hit peak oil?
Oh yeah, it's going to probably tomorrow. It'll be dry.
I see. I always have a fundamental.
And by the way, how can the Greens complain about the price of things? Because they want the price. They have to want the price of things to be much higher. And
well, that's the dichotomy. I guess,
this great debate
of the
about
Greens, isn't it? Because they're
they
actually not green.
No, but I had a great fun. Years ago, probably 5 years ago, I had a great debate with Nandor Tanchos.
Who incidentally is the only Green that I have any respect for.
And it was at Lincoln University, and because everyone loves, Nandor, that was when he was a rock star, because he had dreadlocks and he was in Parliament and
Rode
advocated.
skateboards and...
Yeah. And I got to speak first, and I said, look, what Nandor wants is for you to be able to buy and sell marijuana freely, 24 hours, 7 days a week. And I myself abhor drugs. I think people that do drugs are stupid, because the greatest thing in the world is your mind, so why mess with it? And you should be free to do that, and no tax on it. And I said, funnily enough, I agree. He even thinks you should be able to buy and sell marijuana on Easter Sunday.
And you agree.
And I agree. But the trouble with Nandor is, that's the only thing you're allowed to buy and sell. And everything else has to be controlled, regulated, taxed, health warnings, banned. Even food is going to be banned. You have Sue Keasley worrying about,
Pies.
me eating a chook or a pie, and yet, they're advocating smoking a dope. And I said, the trouble with this is we're going to end up all living in a cave, sort of getting up in the morning to hoe the dope crop, and that's how we live. It's not the way I want to live. And it's not the way of a Western prosperous country. Again, to hear the Greens going on about how attacking Fonterra for basically making too much money. And yet you sit in Parliament and listen to the Greens, and all they want is more money spent on things. More money on this, more money on that, more money on this. And you think, well, that's all very good, but where does all this more money come from?
Well, I don't subscribe to the more money. And if we just touch back on education, we've got this system that's in place called the decile system.
Mm-hmm.
And it works like this, is that if your school is in a lower socio-economic electorate, it gets 10 times as much money as a school at the other end of the decile scale that's in a...
Is it 10 times?
Well, it's some phenomenal amount of money.
I don't think it's 10 times.
Don't think it's 10 times, but it is a lot. It's a huge difference. But if you look at it in the true socialist scheme, that the answer to everything is to put more money into it, surely we should see then at those schools that are decile 10 or decile 1 or decile 2, which is the lowest that they're at, surely we should see stellar academic performance coming out of those schools because they've got more money. It doesn't
work like that. Well, the great thing about socialism is we've tested it to destruction, and we've had another test with Labour.
Has it worked anywhere in the world that you're aware of?
I've visited a lot of socialist countries because they fascinate me, because it's a bit like you take a market economy for granted because things just are there, And so I love going to commie countries and socialist countries and former commie countries. And I went as a young man to places like East Germany and Romania when they were still commie, and just to see if they worked, and concluded that they didn't. But latterly I've taken to going to commie countries to see if I can find one thing that works, just one thing that would be better, and I can't find it. They fail on every aspect. I mean, even this little aspect of saying, well, maybe they're all poor, but they're all equally poor. But that doesn't work either, because what you have in a commie country is the rich and the powerful. And then the massive poverty. You don't even actually have inequality. It's actually capitalist societies that empower the lowly paid,
well,
because it actually enriches
innovation too.
It's a great system.
I mean, you look at where a lot of the
but we're talking to the converted. What we've got to do
is get that out into
to get that out, and I mean that's what my goal now is to raise the money to get this into the letterboxes. My experience of people is that if they see this, if they read it, they say, gee whiz, and if they're on our side of the ledger, which is they're a centre-right voter, They start thinking about giving their party vote to ACT. The National Party are looking at ACT and they're saying, well, yeah, we sort of agree with those ideas, but they're not very popular, so we won't do them.
But if you hoover up 8% and National hoovers up another 8% from the centre, we're in home and hose with some sensible policies.
And we have a mandate.
That's right.
And you can understand the National Party saying, well, if ACT can't get its 8%, we're not going to go for those policies.
Here's some questions some bloggers have sent in. Right? They're a bit tongue-in-cheek. First one is, when did you last drink alcohol?
Well, I stopped drinking almost by accident. And what year was it? 2003 or 4. I had a week off and I never went back. And I remember the odd time I've had half a glass of beer and I can't finish it. I've lost the taste. So I really haven't drunk for 4 or 5 years.
Right. And how's your dancing improving?
Quite good. I never danced in my life, and I went on the dancing show, which I could fill a blog with, but I got to the end of it and I thought, you know, that's the hardest thing I've ever done.
Physically?
No, mentally.
Right.
To get up and dance is, and why is it hard? I think because we're scared of humiliating ourselves. So getting up and dancing is hard, but to dance on TV just adds to it. You know, 1 million people or so watching.
It was a huge risk, I think, for you to do that.
Yeah, and I thought, you know, but because it's the hardest thing I've ever tried, I thought, you know, I want to keep going. And it took me a few months, but I found a wonderful teacher. And once or twice a week, I go around to her place and we have a lesson and we get invited to dance at concerts together. And slowly she's got me getting the hang of it. And I've had to go right back to the basics. The trouble with the Dancing with the Stars is you tended to not do the basics. So dancing isn't about the steps and the flash throwing around. It's actually about weight transfer and posture. And that helps you politically because you learn to...
Shoulders back, chest out.
Yeah. So it is getting better, but you know, I'm probably now a beginner.
This person wants to know when you're going to get a slimmed down version of your picture on your electric car.
As soon as I get the money to pay for it. And
Can't you just borrow and hope like the government does?
So I'm raising a bit of money for that and getting a design done. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to get a slimmed down version on the car because the paper may take a picture of that. But I thought about putting a wee trailer on it.
With the 20 points?
With the 20-point plan. And then I'd put a speaker on the top of the car.
Yes, because broadcasts aren't illegal under the Electoral Finance Act.
So then I could pull my little car around, pull it to the shopping centre, put a wee box out, stand there, and not have to worry about that damn Electoral Finance Act. And I think actually it would be quite a thing.
Like a traditional soapbox politician.
That's right. Worked in Epsom. Exactly.
Now an economics one. What do you believe is the optimal rate of income tax?
I'm tempted to say 0 because I think that...
And just have consumption taxes.
Just a consumption tax would be ideal. And we know from empirical work done here in New Zealand, some of the best, and around the world, that they find that the growth maximising rate of tax relative to GDP is about 15 to 20%. And so we've got a long way to get it down. The only way you're going to get it down to those levels is to actually shift resources from the state back to the individual and have them make their own decisions around health and education. And there's no reason why you can't do that, and if you did that you'd get a much better result. So as low as possible. I certainly think Roger's idea of getting a top rate of tax, down to 20 cents is a good one.
Right. Now back still on tax. Do you believe that National will cut taxes?
They'll cut them, but not much.
More than Labor?
Yes, they'll promise more than Labor. And The situation is this: Labor are philosophically opposed to tax cuts. They want to put taxes up because they want to punish the rich and successful. The National Party actually believe in lower taxes, but they're a Conservative party and they always accept Labor spending. And so what amazes me is, and I don't do this, Bill English has accepted that the government is going to spend $61 billion.
But it used to be 20 odd billion.
Yes, in fact, when Michael Cullen came to power, it was 34, and so he's nearly doubled it. The budget forecast is for it to double, and I don't accept that level of spending. I don't believe that you can go from $34 billion to 61 and not have a huge amount of waste.
Michael Cullen says National Act can't afford their tax cuts, but that's based on the assumption that that National Act keeps their policies intact.
That's right.
So, for example, the ongoing costs for a broken down railway train set could be eliminated overnight, even if we gave the thing away.
Oh,
right?
It would, yeah, I mean, we might be lucky to give it away.
Yeah.
We've got
Abolishing
to find some
working for
Australians to
families.
buy it.
Abolishing working for families would probably net hundreds of millions of dollars in less administration costs.
Sure, and lower taxes.
Yes.
So rather than handing people a benefit, you cut their taxes so they're square, but they're actually keeping more of their own money. There's a huge amount that you can do here. We can have a large tax-free threshold and say to people, look, if you take out health insurance, you won't pay tax. There's huge opportunities to shift things back to individual responsibility and personal freedom. Amazingly,
that weans people off the beneficiary mentality.
Sure. And of course, Labor are all about enticing you in. You know, that's how they win votes. We'll give you free loans. We'll give you $60 in tax cuts.
You and I know they're not free.
They're not.
It costs.
Even the voters know they're not free, but they still vote for it. And what we've got to do is stand up and say, hang on, where we're going to be in 10 or 20 years' time. And that's why this is so important.
Yes.
And this is why the party vote to act is so important. Because right now in New Zealand, people are pretty low. They're finding it hard to make ends meet. Prices are going up, wages are static, taxes are high, interest rates are high. There's a glimmer of hope in a change of government. So they say, oh, thanks.
But it's only a glimmer of hope.
Well, we get a change of government, and if it's National and New Zealand First, or National on their own, or National and the Maori Party, or whatever, people are going to say, gee. But if it's National plus Act, it can become a reality. That's why it's so important, and this is why I've got such a great year ahead of me.
Right. Based on that then, National and Act, which MP outside of Act do you get on best with?
I get on with them all, to be honest now. I never used to. I used to always just attack them, those that were in government. But I've worked hard to get on well with them. And I have to say, probably the MP I get on best with is John Key. And I get on well with him. I've always had a good relationship with Chris Finlayson and Richard Worth here in Epsom.
Yes.
I've got on well with him. He's helped me with my regulatory responsibility bill at the Commerce Committee. I've worked well with Helen Clark in the past. I've got on well with her. I'm working with Leanne Darzell and Paul Swain on my regulatory responsibility bill. I've got on well with them.
Well, I've heard a lot of compliments from a lot of sides on the abilities of Leanne Darzell.
Yes, she's very, very capable. And I sit beside Tariana Turia, and I get on well with the Maori Party because in a way we share a similar rascality, if that's a word. And
it is now.
It is now. And also when they first turned up the Parliament, they were a bit shaky on some of the standing orders, and I helped them. And certainly a lot of our policies align, and it'll be a very interesting thing where the Maori Party ends up philosophically.
Well, it's interesting too. I've looked at it as well. They've got some brains in the Maori Party.
Oh,
yes,
sure.
they've got some larrikins as well, like Hone and a few others.
Hone's great fun though, because I sit with him in the select committee in
But
the early
sometimes he
days.
comes up with great ideas.
Yeah, we were sitting there with Hone once, and he said, I said, Hone, do you feel like this gets boring? And I said, do you feel like causing some trouble? And he said, sure. I said, come with me, watch this. And then I made her some point, and then they had a big argument, and then we had to have a vote, and Holly sided with me and we caused trouble. And it was just enough that we caused trouble. But the funny thing about Holly is, you know, I like him because he's sort of like a kid. But he's in his 50s, he's a grandfather.
You spin him round in circles and point him in a direction and off he goes.
And he's not going to apologise to the judge, and then his mum tells him off, and so he does. You know, you're sort of thinking,
See, if you look at...
I've not seen many MPs get told off by their mum.
No.
And change their mind.
Exactly. But if you look at the Maori Party, I believe that they are against the beneficiary mentality.
Yes.
Peter Sharples is no dummy.
No.
Neither is Tariana Turia.
No.
And the other member of the Brains Trust who you never see is Professor Winiata.
Yes.
Now those are some very intelligent people who will listen to reason. And I don't see any reason though, I don't see any reason why the Maori Party can't work with National. And on the balance of the people involved, their personal beliefs and their policies they put out at the last election, which will be largely unchanged, I believe that the Maori Party is not, as the Labour Party considers it to be, a left-wing party, that they are very much a centre-right party.
Well, the reality is too, the Maori Party is like the ACT Party. If they're to succeed with their policies, they actually have to work with other parties.
And they know that.
And we know that. And I mean, and to be honest, if you look at the policies of the Labour and the National Party now and historically, except Don Brash and Ruth Richardson, and except Roger Douglas, who are now, those three are all ACT supporters, you could put a tissue paper between the two of them. So in terms of the ideals and ideas...
In fact, they overlap in some...
That's right, and then with Muldoon and Roger Douglas...
Well, they were both in the wrong parties, weren't they?
Well, they both did the job. One socialised the economy totally and one deregulated it.
Well, one stuffed it and one saved it.
Yeah. And so I'm less worried about National Labour and more interested in getting our ideals and ideas on the table. And
to do that, you need 8%.
Yep.
Last question that I've got here. Considering you're into fitness and you have your own personal trainer and dancing coach, what do you think of David Farrer's personal trainer?
He should be taken to the Commerce Commission. David Farrer's personal trainer should have the book thrown at him. The very idea that there's a professional taking money and trying and supposedly getting David Farrer fit and in good shape. I don't believe in sort of government regulating business, setting standards.
But that's a case of...
But that is a case that there's some very serious information problems that poor David Farrer is operating in a fog. That he's paying money to someone who's supposedly getting him fit and into shape, that's fraud.
Well, Rodney, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Fun.
And I hope I've helped you get your 20 points out in the wider audience.
You've done, and I tell you what, from my observation, probably more people read Whaleoil than read the Herald.
I hope so. Let's do this again sometime.
Anytime.
Okay, thanks.
Take care.